The box lay half open on the hardwood floor, its cardboard flaps folded neatly outward like wings trying to take flight. I had been staring at it for an hour, not because I needed anything from inside, but because I couldn't bring myself to move it. Inside were the curtains I'd bought last year, still wrapped in plastic. I thought maybe today would be the day I put them up, but instead, I sat in the new house's living room with my knees pulled close and the faint scent of fresh paint. Clinging to the air, it wasn't loneliness. Not exactly. It was adjustment, the kind that feels both thrilling and terrifying. At 71, I had signed my own papers, placed my own signature on the deed without anyone co-signing or hovering. My name, Evelyn Marlowe, sat in thick black ink on the last page. No husband, no children, no siblings, no guardian beside me. Just me. After decades of living in other people's spaces. This little brick cottage at the edge of Alderwood was mine. I'd barely been here 3 days when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I'd been enjoying the silence too much, but the sound felt too sharp to ignore. The old rotary-style phone I'd brought with me rattled when it rang, its bell louder than any modern device. I picked it up without checking the ID, Evelyn. The voice was bright, too bright, a cheer that carried obligation beneath it. Just a heads up, dear. We're coming by this evening. Shouldn't be more than 2 hours. There'll be 11 of us from our side. Maybe 12. I told everyone you had this space. You don't mind, do you? It was Margaret, my niece. She always spoke like she was giving me a weather forecast, inevitable, non-negotiable. We'll need a couple of beds. Maybe cots, if you have them. Oh, and food, of course. We'll bring some snacks, but everyone knows you're a wonderful cook. They're all excited to see the new place. She chuckled like she was doing me a favor. Anyway, we'll be there soon. The line went dead before I could answer. I stood with the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone as though it were proof of my own foolishness. The house creaked faintly around me, the kind of sound that new walls make as they settle. My hand shook slightly as I put the phone down. I hadn't even unpacked the linens. I thought about calling her back, saying no, saying this wasn't a good time, saying it was impossible. But I knew Margaret. She didn't ask permission. She declared arrangements. She would arrive whether I protested or not, and she would arrive with a crowd. I didn't pace. I didn't cry. I simply reached into the drawer of the small desk by the wall and pulled out a yellow legal pad. The kind I'd kept for years, filling with lists no one else ever saw. On the first page, I wrote the date, drew a line down the middle. On one side, food, towels, sleeping spaces, trash bags. On the other, documents, enforcement proof. I underlined proof twice, because Margaret had done this before. Not exactly here, but everywhere else I had tried to build some measure of peace. She believed that because I never had children of my own, my life and space were extensions of hers. When I stayed with her after my husband passed, it was supposed to be temporary. Just until I found my footing, she'd said. But footing is hard to find when someone keeps pushing you into the corner for 3 years. I folded her children's laundry. I cooked dinners no one thanked me for. You don't pay rent, Evelyn, she'd remind me with that sing-song lilt, as though I hadn't sold nearly everything I owned to keep from being a burden. So when I bought this house, I knew it wouldn't be simple. Margaret didn't believe in boundaries. If I baked bread, she carried it to her church potluck. If I bought new towels, she said, perfect, we needed more. If I sat down, she asked me to fetch the remote. Now she was bringing 11 people to my doorstep. Maybe 12. I went into the guest room, changed the sheets, wiped the bathroom sink with vinegar. I moved calmly, deliberately. Calculation, not contentment. Because I wasn't preparing to welcome them. I was preparing for the aftermath by the time I fluffed the second pillow. I had already made my first call, not to Margaret, not to anyone in her orbit, to the county office. I asked about noise ordinances, about occupancy caps for single-family homes, about what constituted trespassing. The woman on the other end spoke kindly, with a patience I wasn't used to. She gave me numbers, names, extensions. If it becomes disruptive, she said, don't hesitate to call. When I hung up, I wrote it all down. Evidence mattered. The first car pulled into my gravel drive just before dusk. Then another. The sound of tires crunching across the stones made my stomach twist. Margaret stepped out first, smiling as though she'd given me a prize. Children tumbled out behind her, followed by cousins, in-laws, partners. Bags dragged across the ground, coolers thumped against the porch. 12. She called. I miscounted, but I knew you wouldn't mind. They swept into the house like a tide. Voices filled every corner, overlapping, laughing, complaining. Someone opened my fridge without asking. Another cousin claimed the main bedroom. A child ran upstairs shouting about which bed was theirs. No one asked permission. No one congratulated me on the new home. I stood by the door, watching. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't tell them to stop. I simply observed, the way you might note storm damage before filing insurance. My legal pad sat waiting on the counter by nightfall. The house smelled of reheated pizza and spilled soda. Shoes littered the hallway. Someone dropped a damp towel on the banister. A cousin asked for the Wi-Fi password. Another for oat milk. I gave them neither. I retreated to the smallest room, carrying my folded clothes in silence. Margaret caught me in the hall. She laid a hand on my shoulder, all false sympathy. "It's only 2 weeks," she said. "Be flexible." Flexibility. Admired only when it benefits the demander. I closed the door behind me. Not hard, but firm. And then I wrote, page after page. Documented each thing. Who had taken which bed, which fixture was broken, which request was made. The next day, I called Deputy Hale. He was a patient man, deliberate in his words. We spoke about lodging agreements, about property rights. He told me exactly what to prepare. By the third night, one of Margaret's sons snapped the bathroom faucet, trying to fix it. Water dripped onto the tile. No apology, just muttering about cheap fixtures. My knives were moved from their block. A plate cracked. Teenagers argued over who got the better window view. I stopped asking. I only noted I kept receipts. I hid a stack of backup dishes high in a cupboard. I logged the hours I spent cleaning up their mess. I hummed softly as I wrote, not from happiness, but calculation. On the 5th night, I walked out onto the porch and dialed the number I'd saved. Mrs. Marlowe came the voice. "You ready?" "Yes," I said simply. "I'm done hosting." The woman on the other end confirmed the arrangements. Deputy Hale would arrive at dawn. I didn't sleep much that night. The walls pulsed with music and laughter, a house swollen with entitlement. But my mind was steady at sunrise. I taped 2 notices to the front door. Private property, short term. Lodging agreement required for all occupants, inside. I laid out 12 neatly printed contracts across the dining table. Each one listed $120 per person per night. Deposit required. All damages billed separately. I set a pen beside each copy. Margaret came down first, hair mussed, wearing someone else's sweatshirt. She squinted at the notices, then at the table. "What is this?" "A lodging agreement," I said. She laughed, sharp, disbelieving. "Funny." She skimmed the page. "Why tour? Serious?" I didn't answer. I unlocked the front door and stepped aside as Deputy Hale entered. Punctual, steady-eyed, morning, he said. "This, the group." Margaret's face paled. "You called the police on family." "No," I corrected gently. "I called the county office. This is enforcement." Her voice cracked. "You're not actually enforcing this." "You can't. I can." I handed Hale the folder of documents, time-stamped messages, receipts, copies of texts. "Everything's here." The chatter in the kitchen quieted. A cousin muttered about insane old women. Another scoffed. But I didn't flinch. "You're welcome to stay," I told them calmly. "But not for free. Not anymore." Margaret dropped the contract as though it burned her. "You can't be serious," she whispered. Though her voice carried enough for the room to hear, Deputy Hale cleared his throat, firm but not unkind. "Ma'am, this property is listed under her sole ownership. She's within her rights to require compensation or request you vacate." The air thinned as though the walls themselves were listening. A few of the younger ones exchanged uneasy glances. One of the children tugged on Margaret's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, what's happening?" "Nothing," Margaret said too quickly, the false cheer cracking at the edges. "Your aunt's just confused." She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. "You've lost your mind, Evelyn. These are your people." "No," I said evenly. "They're your people. You never asked if they were mine." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. One of her sisters, Helen, who had spent the past 3 days rearranging my pantry as though she owned it, finally broke it. "You think you can charge us like some cheap motel?" she snapped. I turned to face her. "Not cheap. Fair?" Hale placed a hand on his belt, a gesture of readiness more than threat. "Here's what will happen," he said. "Each adult occupant will either sign the agreement and provide the required deposit, or they will vacate by sundown. Failure to comply will result in removal for trespassing." Margaret's mouth opened, then shut. Her eyes flicked toward me, searching for weakness, for the old compliance she was used to. She didn't find it. I folded my hands. "You're welcome to stay, Margaret. But the rules have changed." Her jaw trembled. Not from fear, but from rage at losing the stage she thought was hers, Camden. Her eldest appeared from the hallway, hair disheveled, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" "Your aunt thinks she's running an inn," Margaret snapped. I didn't rise to it. "No, Camden. I'm running my home." "That's different." He frowned, torn between loyalty and logic. His gaze landed on the deputy, then on the contracts. I saw him chew his cheek the way he always did when he realized there was no easy fix. The day stretched long after that. Some of them argued loudly. Others whispered furiously in corners. A cousin scrolled on her phone, muttering about lawyers. Children whined about breakfast. No one picked up the dishes they'd left strewn across the table the night before. By noon, 3 of them had signed. Reluctantly, with scrawled signatures meant to convey disdain more than agreement. They handed over cash and muttered insults under their breath by 3 o'clock. 2 cars had left the driveway, trunks slamming, voices sharp. A teenager shouted from the back seat, "You'll regret this." Before the vehicles sped away, by sundown, only 5 remained, Margaret among them. She sat at the table, arms crossed, her signed contract lying between us. Her eyes burned holes through the paper. "You've made this hostile," she said finally. "No," I replied. "I've made it clear." The deputy left after collecting the last signatures, promising to check in later. When the door shut behind him, the silence inside was not peace, but pressure. Margaret's children stared at me with eyes that carried her bitterness. That night, I heard the muffled sound of drawers opening in the kitchen, of cabinets slamming. Someone knocked over a plant on the porch. No apology followed. I didn't flinch. I noted it the next morning. I found the envelope. Left on the counter, folded once, Margaret's familiar handwriting on the outside. Inside was a note scrawled in hasty strokes. "You're cold, Evelyn. Family doesn't do this. I hope you're happy." No signature. As though the words themselves were enough. I folded the paper in half. Then again, slid it into the fireplace and lit the match. The flame caught quick, curling the words into ash. I didn't watch them vanish. I turned away, poured myself coffee, and wrote the day's date at the top of a fresh page. It wasn't anger I felt. Not grief either. It was certainty. For decades, my silence had been mistaken for permission. My hands had been taken, my time borrowed, my boundaries ignored. But silence, once broken, does not return the same. The house, even with 5 of them still inside, already felt different. It felt like mine by the 5th day Margaret left. Not with a handshake, not with gratitude, but with a slammed trunk and bitter words. Her children trailed after her, their resentment heavy enough to leave footprints. I stood at the gate, clipboard in hand, watching their car disappear down the curve of the road. For a long moment I stayed there, the cool air pressing against my skin. Then I turned back to the house. Silence, no voices. No footsteps overhead. No clatter of dishes I hadn't dirtied. The quiet was not empty. It was full. That night, I lit the candle I'd been saving. Its flame flickered across the walls, painting them with soft light. I sat at the table, not to tally receipts or clean crumbs, but to sit. To breathe, but peace, once tasted, sharpens the memory of intrusion. And I knew Margaret Dot she would return. The calls began 2 days later. First one, then 3. No voicemails, just missed calls. A string of texts followed. Some polite, some sharp. One that said, only, "We need to talk." I didn't answer, not out of spite. Not from anger, but because I was finished. The house was mine. Still, I prepared. I made copies of every signed contract. I photographed damages, logged expenses, filed everything in a neat folder labeled proof. I called my lawyer and updated the deed with a clause that inheritance would be contingent on respect, not vengeance. Structure. I had lived too long in rooms that weren't mine. Kitchens where I was a guest in silence. Houses where I was tolerated but never seen. That would never happen again. The soil in the garden had dried where Margaret's folding chairs had sunk into it. I pulled weeds, reset stepping stones, trimmed lavender. The work was quiet, steady, restorative. A neighbor stopped by with a tin of muffins, smiling shyly. "Welcome to Alderwood," she said. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand anything. Just a smile, a gesture, and she was gone. The silence wasn't lonely. It was alive. I watered plants, opened windows, brewed tea in the cracked porcelain cup I'd always kept hidden, afraid someone else might break it. No one asked me to change the thermostat. No one told me I was rigid. No one took without asking. For the first time in years, the space around me fit. And still in the back of my mind, I could hear Margaret's laughter. Sharp, dismissive, certain she'd return, but I had learned something she never understood. Respect doesn't require permission, it just stops waiting for approval. I closed the folder of notarized pages and set it in the drawer beside the key box, locked it, and waited. The days grew quiet after Margaret left, but the quiet never came unaccompanied. It carried with it the weight of waiting. The garden bloomed again, lavender stretching toward the light. But in the silence between the wind chimes, kept hearing the phantom echo of footsteps on my porch. The phone rang every other night. At first I ignored it. Then I unplugged it. But Margaret was not one to accept silence as an answer. Letters came folded and stuffed under my door. Some sharp, some begging, all circling the same refrain. "You owe us. You're cruel. You'll regret this." I didn't open them. I slid them into a shoebox labeled evidence. And yet unease has a way of finding its cracks. One night I woke to the sound of gravel shifting outside. I stood at the upstairs window, heart beating like it used to when storms rolled across the prairie of my childhood. A figure moved in the drive, tall, hunched. It wasn't Margaret, too tall, too slow, but someone lingered near the porch, bent to peer at the notice still taped to the door. I didn't turn on the light. I simply watched until the figure retreated, their footsteps fading into the dark. The next morning, a corner of the notice was torn loose, flapping like a warning flag. I replaced it with a fresh copy, bold letters, reinforced with tape. Private property, by appointment only. That afternoon, I called Hale, told him what I'd seen. He listened quietly, then said, "It may not be them, but keep documenting. And if you hear more, call me direct." He gave me his personal line. That night, I slept with a folder of proof beside me on the nightstand. The weight of paper can be heavier than iron when it carries your defense. 3 nights later, Margaret returned. I heard them before I saw them. Tires rolling too fast down the gravel. Door slamming, voices spilling out in a chorus of irritation. Margaret's voice cut sharp through the dusk. "This is ridiculous, Evelyn. We're not doing this dance again." Kay didn't move. I sat at the table, hands folded as the knock rattled the door. "Open up." I let the silence stretch. When the knock came again, harder, I rose, walked slowly, deliberately, and unlatched the lock. Margaret stood with 3 others, her sister Helen Camden, and one of the nephews who always looked like trouble waiting for a place to land. Their expressions carried a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think a piece of paper can keep us out?" Margaret hissed, waving a crumpled letter. "No," I said. "Respect can. And since that's absent, the paper will do." She shoved past me, her entourage following. "You can't just shut your family out," she shouted, her voice rising enough to draw the attention of a neighbor. Walking his dog across the street, I closed the door gently behind them. "You are not my family," I said softly. "You're guests, and guests have rules." The nephew barked a laugh, sharp and ugly. "Rules? Lady, you've gone senile." He moved toward the kitchen, opening cabinets. "Got anything worth drinking?" "Leave it," Camden muttered, though his own eyes wouldn't meet mine. I walked to the table, opened the folder, and set down the latest contracts. New terms. Higher rates. Damage clauses doubled. Margaret's face reddened. "This is insane. You can't keep treating us like criminals." "You treat yourself like one when you trespass," I replied, her mouth opened. But before the words could spill, a knock came at the door again. Firm, deliberate. Deputy Hale stepped in, hat tucked under his arm. "Evening, folks," he said. His eyes swept the room, calm but commanding. "We've had noise complaints from the neighbors, and I understand there are issues with occupancy again." Margaret froze, the color draining from her face. Hale's gaze landed on me. "Do you want to file formal charges tonight, Mrs. Marlowe?" The silence in the room shifted. For once, I was not the one shrinking into it. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Trespassing, harassment, and violation of property ordinances." Margaret's gasp cut the air. "You wouldn't?" "I would," I interrupted. "And I will." Hale nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "All right. I'll need statements, documentation." "I have everything you need," I said, sliding the folder across the table. Pages of proof, organized, labeled, time-stamped. Every call logged, every text printed. Every broken item photographed. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for Camden, but he stepped back, his face pale. "Mom," he whispered, "she's serious. She's lost it." Margaret snapped, but her voice cracked. Hale raised a hand. "Enough. Here's the deal. You either leave voluntarily tonight, or I process this paperwork, and you'll be facing formal charges by morning." The nephew cursed under his breath. Helen muttered something about betrayal. But Margaret just stood there shaking, her rage collapsing under the weight of inevitability. "You'll die alone," she spat, her final weapon dull and overused. "No," I said calmly. "I'll live alone. There's a difference." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. By midnight, their cars were gone. The driveway was littered with footprints, tire tracks, and one broken flower pot knocked from the porch. I didn't sweep it that night. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, candle flickering, listening to the house breathe in relief when Hale returned the next morning with the paperwork. He set the stamped documents before me. "It's all official now," he said. "They're barred from returning without your consent. You'll be notified if they contest it, but I think you've made yourself clear." "Yes," I said softly. "Clear." After he left, I walked through the house. Towels still damp in the bathroom. A streak of makeup powder on the sink. A pizza crust abandoned on the windowsill. I didn't clean it. I called a service, made them tea, and let them do the work. I took photographs first, logged damages, sent the invoice to Margaret with a copy of her own signature attached. No emotions. Just math. The days that followed were different, quieter. A neighbor stopped by with a jar of jam. Another waved from across the fence. They didn't pry. They didn't ask for anything. They just smiled. I spent mornings in the garden, afternoons reading on the porch, evenings watching the light shift across the walls. No loud music. No slammed doors. No demands. One evening, I found an envelope in the mailbox. Camden's handwriting. Careful, tight strokes. "I hope one day you see how cold this was." It read. No signature. I folded it once, then again, slid it into the fireplace, and lit a match. The paper curled fast, trying to be forgiven. I didn't grant it. I walked through the house slowly after that. The silence followed me, steady, full. Not empty, not lonely. Restorative. At 71, I had finally built something no one could take. Not because it was large or expensive or grand, but because it was mine and it would stay mine. Sometimes choosing peace doesn't come with applause. It comes with stillness. I sat at the garden's edge one late afternoon, watching a squirrel chase its shadow across the stones. The wind shifted, lifting the chimes I'd hung on the porch. They rang gently only when the breeze allowed, not when someone forced them. And for the first time in decades, I understood boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. And for once in my life, I held the only key. The cottage breathed with me, quiet and steady. Every corner mine. Every room mine. And when the phone rang again that night, Margaret's name glowing across the screen, I let it ring. Let it fade into silence. Because silence, when it's yours, it's not absence, it's presence. And mine, finally, was full.